So before we begin, spoilers for the end of season 1 of the Fallout TV show. So if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend watching something else. So I've talked about the nuclear war in Fallout a lot over the last month, and I've seen quite a few comments referencing this. And while I have made a video on this in the past, I'd like to make a sort of deeper, more directed video about why Vault-Tec absolutely didn't start the Great War. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So before we begin, I want to just set some ground rules here. I am working on the assumption that all of the Fallout games and the Fallout TV show are equally canon. So when they conflict, I am working really hard to find ways to make them work within the established rules that other pieces of media have established. I am not counting things that were never released as canon sources, as those were never released. I'm also not going to put a ton of weight on statements from the original creators of Fallout who did define who started the nuclear war, since they don't own the IP anymore, so their word on current Fallout content is sketchy at best. So, for those of you who haven't seen the Fallout TV show but have stuck around past that spoiler warning, at the end of the show we see a boardroom full of Vault-Tec executives and executives of other major corporations in the United States basically discussing the intention of dropping a nuclear bomb to start a nuclear war. And, well, it is very explicit in the way it's depicted there. I don't think it's actually what happened, and I, quite frankly, think it would be a very stupid thing for these companies to do, and I'm about to tell you why. So let's just start with motivations and why I don't think Vault-Tec is really motivated to start the nuclear war, and then we'll talk about why they definitely didn't start it regardless of their motivations. So let's jump in with their motivations. Now, a big piece of the Fallout TV show is that the Vault-Tec Corporation has a financial responsibility to their shareholders, and Vault-Tec would have every reason to try to derail the peace process, to try to keep the world on a razor's edge. After all, their biggest moneymaker is selling spots in their vaults, selling the potential of surviving should a nuclear catastrophe happen. So, the more people that believe that a nuclear war is right around the corner, the higher your sales are going to be. So, they do have every motivation to prevent things like an end to the Sino-American War. But, if they push us over that edge to a nuclear war, their profit streams stop. In fact, all of the big companies in that boardroom stop making a profit the moment the world ends. There's no more customer base to buy your products. At the end of the day, the goals of a corporation, yeah, sure, an individual may want to grab political power for themselves, but the goals of a corporation and their shareholders are always going to be to make money, and at the end of the world, there's no money to be made. So, while these corporations may have an interest in keeping the world on the brink of nuclear war, they don't want to push us over the edge any more than anyone else, because they don't have anything to really gain from that. Now, that discussion in the boardroom could have been spitballing, it could have been proposing the idea, or they could have just been saying that to try to sell the idea of investing in these vaults to these other corporations, which, by the way, I am surprised they would go along with the idea of ending the world, because it would mean their independent revenue streams would stop. So, none of that makes sense from the motivations of a corporate entity. But we're going to move past that and talk about the nuclear war itself, and why Vault-Tec definitely didn't start it. So it's defined in earlier Fallout games, the events leading up to the nuclear exchange on the morning of October 23rd, 2077. So I'm just going to build a little bit of context here. The United States and China have been at war for 10 years in the Sino-American War, which began with a Chinese invasion of Alaska. In the course of that war, the United States launched a counter-invasion of mainland China, which has stalled out, and the fighting shifted to primarily focus on pushing the Chinese out of Alaska. Once that was achieved in 2076, the Americans were able to put their full force behind their invasion of the Chinese mainland, breaking the stalemate and driving towards Beijing. In October 2077, American forces are on the outskirts of the Chinese capital, and the war looks like it's about to end in an American victory, and this would make the Chinese government very scared. They're facing resource scarcity already, and they're about to lose to their biggest rival in a fight on their home turf, so they're in a pretty desperate spot. This is likely why we see leaders of the United States and other major global powers go into hiding around this time. It's becoming clear that a desperate China is on its last last legs backed against the wall with increasing pressure against them, and eventually they're going to snap and either collapse or start a nuclear war. But the real damning thing against the idea of Vault-Tec starting this nuclear war occurs in the wee hours of the morning on October 23rd, about 6 or 7 hours before the actual primary nuclear exchange, when the U.S. military detects signs that the Chinese military is moving into position to carry out a series of strikes. This include a fleet of nuclear submarines that appear to have positioned themselves off the west coast of the United States, and flights of bombers in the air over the Bering Strait, making their way towards Alaska. These would be some of the first nuclear forces deployed in the beginning of a large-scale nuclear exchange between the People's Republic of China and the United States. By the 9 o'clock hour in the morning, the American warning satellites detect ICBMs launched from within China, and the exchange is now underway. With Chinese weapons inbound, the Americans respond, and the world ends. There is no room in any of that for a rogue nuke detonated by Vault-Tec. It's just not possible. It's very clear that the Chinese government had days or longer to prepare for the nuclear strike that they ultimately carried out that led to an American retaliation. So nothing of this was a surprise to the Chinese government, who would have been caught off guard had Vault-Tec, an American corporation, detonated an atomic weapon in an American city to make the Americans think a Chinese attack was underway, which, by the way, would look entirely differently. Let's play out that scenario for a sec. Vault-Tec detonates a nuke in, let's say, Los Angeles, and the Americans assume that that's a Chinese attack and launch a retaliatory strike. This would catch China basically off guard and force them to respond with a hair-trigger response that wouldn't involve moving bombers and submarines into position, but instead just firing everything they could to get it out of the silos as quickly as possible before they're destroyed by incoming American weapons. All this to say, the fact that the Chinese were very clearly preparing for a nuclear war before the initial engagement basically removes the possibility of Vault-Tec using an atomic bomb. In fact, while I initially thought perhaps Vault-Tec had deployed an atomic bomb on the battlefields in China to make it look like one side had used a tactical nuke, that would still lead to a much less planned escalation. It seems like this was very much a planned escalation on the part of the PLA. But at the end of the day, it's fiction. It's Fallout, and you can believe what you want to believe. If you really want to believe that Vault-Tec dropped the first bomb, you are more than welcome to go ahead and do that. And if you, like me, are skeptical of that, you're welcome to believe that too. If you'd like to learn about the initial strikes on the west coast of the United States, I'll leave a link up here to my video breaking down the nuclear strike scene we see at the start of the Fallout TV show. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think I'm right. Do you think Vault-Tec actually did start the nuclear war? And if so, how do you think that fits into the equation of elements that we know occurred on that morning? And if you have anything else to see me cover in Fallout or Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon to get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.